do you imagine when you hear the word troglodyte? We're guessing it's a cave-dwelling human from the prehistoric past, or perhaps the feral cannibals of a horror western. Well, yeah, that's because of how literature and movies have portrayed troglodytes. However, in truth, troglodyte is a word for a cave dweller, much like the Flintstones if you think about it. But yes, even Bone Tomahawk's ferocious bloodline of inbred cannibals who assaulted and ate their own mothers were also troglodytes. So what's the mystery behind these troglodytes? Where do they come from? What's their history? Well, in this video, we're going to take a closer look at all these questions and more. But before we begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's begin. Origins of the term troglodyte. The modern term troglodyte originates from the Greek word troglodytes, literally meaning one who creeps into holes or a cave goer. The ancient Greeks and Romans used troglodyte as a name for various people they believed lived in caves. Historian Herodotus, living in the 5th century BCE, famously described a race of Ethiopian troglodytes who were basically cave-dwelling folk on the African Red Sea coast. According to Herodotus, these troglodytes were the fastest runners alive and survived by hunting and eating snakes, lizards, and other reptiles. Even more bizarre was their speech, and he wrote that their language sounded like the squeaking of bats. In other words, to Greek ears, these cave people spoke in high-pitched chirps rather than any recognizable human tongue. But you know what? It was descriptions like this that pretty much blurred the line between reality and myth, thereby painting troglodytes as almost fantastical beings. I mean, the issue here is that the troglodytes couldn't really write or record their version of history, and that's why we gotta believe what the others wrote about them, and what others wrote about them was more often than not critical and demeaning. Ancient geographers placed troglodyte tribes in various regions. As we were saying earlier, the name Troglodytia was used for a stretch of the Red Sea coast, which is now parts of Egypt, Sudan, or Eritrea, where cave-dwelling people were said to live. Later writers like Diodorus Siculus and Strabo also mentioned troglodytes in Africa and Arabia. Some accounts credited troglodytes with odd accomplishments. For example, Claudius Alanius claimed this famous cave-dwelling tribe even invented a musical instrument called the sambuca. Etymology also ties troglodytes to other concepts. The Latin name, troglodyte, passed into modern languages, and by the mid-1500s, English was using troglodyte to mean cave dweller. The idea became so synonymous with caves that it influenced place names. For instance, some scholars think Africa itself might derive from the Berber word ifri, meaning cave, referencing cave-dwelling people in North Africa. In fact, troglodytic living was once common in parts of North Africa and still survives today in southern Tunisia, but more on that in just a bit. Even taxonomy had a role to play in their expansive history. You see, when the chimpanzee was first described scientifically, it was named Pan troglodytes, and this was because of the mistaken belief that chimps slept in caves like the legendary troglodyte. The name stuck, so our closest great ape cousin carries the troglodyte label to this day. You see, the troglodytes in Bone Tomahawk were not really that, and they were named so only because of a long history of etymology, a name that stuck around for anyone who lived in caves, regardless of their tribe or color. I mean, even the French lived in caves once upon a time, and so did the British, and so did the Indians. Pretty much everybody has troglodyte ancestors, is what we're trying to say. Think about it. By this logic, even the Flintstones are troglodytes or cave dwellers, but we still love them, don't we? The cannibal troglodytes of Bone Tomahawk. No discussion of troglodytes in modern fiction would be complete without mentioning Bone Tomahawk. This 2015 film took the Western genre and painted it with all things horror, with some cannibalistic cave dwellers that the movie liked to call troglodytes. Set in the 1890s, the story follows a posse of townsmen tracking down cave-dwelling cannibals who abducted several people from a frontier town. By calling these creatures troglodytes, the film makes clear these are not ordinary Native Americans, but a wholly separate inhuman group, essentially a spoiled bloodline of inbred animals who rape and eat their own mothers, as Zach McClarnon's native character in the film describes them. And this warns the would-be rescuers while summing up how monstrous these troglodytes are. They have no name in any tribe and no spoken language. They communicate with eerie howls and whistles echoing through the hills, which gives them a near supernatural aura. In fact, they've devised a pretty scary and seemingly painful method of communication. These guys basically embed bone whistles in their throats that let out piercing shrieks, which helps them to signal each other across vast distances. The bone tomahawk troglodytes are presented as utterly feral, pre-social humans, perhaps the last remnants of a cave-dwelling clan untouched by any civilization, and maybe even much worse than the Sentinel tribe from Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which are one of the very few untouched tribes in the contemporary world. I mean, the British did try to turn them into Christians thanks to the white man's burden, but they only ended up killing the Sentinelese people by giving them the common cold and other similar diseases against which they had no immunity. After gaining their independence from the British, the Indian government forbade any contact with the tribe in order to protect them, and even made it a criminal offense to try and contact them. Coming back to the Tomahawk troglodytes, these guys are covered in white ash or clay and wear bone ornaments, including jutting bone pieces through their skin. They also exhibit inhuman strength and savagery. In one infamous scene, which is not for the squeamish, they split a captive completely in half in an act of ritualistic butchery, which shows that these troglodytes view other humans purely as meat. Director S. Craig Zahler intentionally kept their origins mysterious, but he clearly wanted them to function as literal monsters in a Western setting. In essence, the film turns a 1,200-year-old story into a brutal Western, essentially blending the Beowulf and Wendell legend with the cowboy era. Indeed, Bone Tomahawk can be seen as a frontier retelling of the age-old trope of heroes versus cave-dwelling cannibals. By not explaining the troglodytes' backstory, the film makes them an elemental fear. They simply are, lurking in the wilds beyond the boundaries of civilized towns. The real inspiration behind the Bone Tomahawk troglodytes. Despite the fact that the movie wanted to honor the less is more idea, fans never really stop when it comes to discussions, and some of these often become quite fascinating. One of these discusses the inspirations for Bone Tomahawk's troglodytes. One theory links them to a Paiute legend about a race of cannibalistic red-haired giants called the Siteka, whom the Paiute people exterminated after driving them into a cave and setting it on fire. This legend comes from Nevada's Lovelock Cave area and has often been cited in fringe archaeology circles. The Navajo have similar stories about skinwalkers, who were basically witches who live apart and can't be killed with ordinary bullets, and were known for their white body paint and unnerving cries. While Zahler hasn't confirmed any direct connection to these myths, the troglodytes in the film do feel like the amalgam of many cannibal tribe tales and serve as the ultimate boogeyman for the Old West. But more importantly, the movie takes pains to clarify, often through dialogue, that these creatures aren't Native Americans at all. By doing so, the film avoided the ugly trope of equating indigenous people with savages, instead creating an imaginary clan of subhuman cave dwellers. In essence, Zahler's troglodytes are to Westerns what orcs are to fantasy. They're fearsome, speechless primitives that can be killed without moral qualm. In fact, their design was inspired by the Uruk-hai, or orcs from The Lord of the Rings, with no basis in humanity, which was a deliberate move to cast them as literal monsters rather than any real-world group of people. Bone Tomahawk's troglodytes made a huge impression on audiences, at least those with strong stomachs. They're arguably among the most horrifying antagonists in recent film, precisely because they're so close to being human, but stripped of all culture and conscience. The combination of their primitive technology, like bone tomahawks and arrows, their animalistic communication, and their sheer brutality creates a memorable nightmare of a foe. By tapping into the ancient idea of troglodytes, the film gives us a fresh horror villain that feels oddly plausible for a Western, as if, yes, somewhere out there in the American Badlands, there might live a hidden clan of cave people who missed out on a few millennia of human progress. Troglodytes in fantasy and other media. Beyond Bone Tomahawk, troglodytes have appeared in various books, games, and shows, and sometimes in quite unexpected and surprising ways. In classic fantasy role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, troglodytes are a reptilian humanoid race that lives underground. Introduced in early D&D bestiaries, these troglodytes are depicted as foul-smelling, lizard-like cave brutes that attack adventurers on sight. The use of the name keeps the basic essence of a cave dweller, but imagines a non-human creature, which only goes to show just how troglodytes evolved into a fantasy race in gaming lore. Similarly, H.G. Wells's The Time Machine gave us the Morlocks, who are a pale underground people, but they're not called troglodytes in the text. In comic books and science fiction, whenever writers need a quick shorthand for primitive, ugly, subhuman folk, they often reach for troglodytic imagery, if not the name itself. We personally believe that this enduring appeal of troglodytes in fiction likely comes from what they represent. the shadowy underside of civilization. They are us, but not us, humans who didn't leave the cave, who might have taken a different evolutionary or cultural path. This makes them compelling as both villains and subjects of curiosity. Are troglodytes inherently evil? In many stories, unfortunately, they're portrayed that way, often grouped into cannibal hordes. But some works have subverted this idea. For instance, Montesquieu's 1721 satire, Persian Letters, contains a section about a mythical troglodyte society that initially behaves selfishly and collapses, but the survivors rebuild a more virtuous community, essentially using troglodytes as a moral parable. In that instance, troglodytes stood for ordinary people who could choose vice or virtue. One could say that troglodytes oscillate in our imagination between two extremes: the noble caveman and the feral subhuman. On one hand, we have the romantic notion of prehistoric cave folk, like the Flintstones or the clan of the cave bear. On the other, we have the disturbing image of devolved humans lurking beneath cities or in remote caves, as in the horror film The Descent, which features blind cave-dwelling humanoids, which are essentially troglodyte monsters. The word itself even sounds a bit harsh and primitive, which probably encourages its use for ugly brutes. And yet, real troglodytes were simply people finding shelter in rock and earth, often displaying ingenuity in how they lived and survived. Troglodyte as an insult and cultural metaphor. Because cave dwellers were often perceived as primitive, the word troglodyte took on a derogatory tone in many languages. By the 19th century, calling someone a troglodyte was a way to brand them as backwards or ignorant, essentially caveman. The Oxford English Dictionary notes that by 1854, writers were using troglodyte figuratively to mean a person oblivious to the world or stuck in old ways. The term can also imply someone is brutish or reactionary, as if they haven't evolved socially from their cave days. In modern slang, if you call someone an online troglodyte, you're suggesting they're an uncouth, possibly trollish individual hiding behind their figurative cave, in this case, the computer screen. It's worth noting that troglodyte even spawned a shorter slang form called trog, which surfaced around 1956 to mean a boor or obnoxious person. In fact, musician Jimmy Castor played on that stereotype with his 1972 funk hit, Troglodyte. In this song, the narrator talks about a hairy caveman looking for a woman, thereby mixing humor and funk grooves. The song was such a hit that it raced up the charts and peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Pop Chart and number 4 on R&B in 1972. Troglodytes in myth, legend, and literature. Beyond the real caves and the insults, troglodytes have long been characters in myth and fiction, often portrayed as mysterious or fearsome cave people lurking just outside civilized lands. Ancient legends and medieval travelogues love to feature exotic troglodytes. For instance, some interpretations of Persian and Arabic folklore talked of troglodyte people, sometimes interchangeably called ghouls or wild men who inhabited remote deserts or mountains. The idea of subterranean or cave-dwelling humanoids also appears in European folktales, where they might be synonymous with goblins or trolls. One particularly interesting thread is the connection to the Beowulf saga. In the Old English epic, the monster Grendel and his mother could be seen as cave dwellers of a sort, since they live in a dank lair and terrorize the human hall of Heorot. Modern writers have often reimagined such monsters as even more realistic cave people. This is exactly what author Michael Crichton did in his 1976 novel, Eaters of the Dead, which was adapted into the film The 13th Warrior in 1999. In the story, a band of Vikings battle a tribe of cannibalistic Neanderthal-like humans called the Wendol. The Wendol are never really referred to as troglodytes in the film, but they clearly fit the concept as they live in caves, wear bearskins, have a primitive language, and attack the so-called modern humans under the cover of darkness. Essentially, Beowulf's Grendel reinterpreted as a troglodyte tribe, brutal, subhuman, yet human and utterly terrifying. Cave dwellers in history and prehistory. So we've all but established that troglodyte refers to any person dwelling in a cave. Humans have been doing that for a very long time. In the Stone Age, of course, caves were shelters for some of our ancestors. For example, in France's Vézère Valley, archaeologists found evidence of people living in cliffside caves as far back as 17,000 years ago. These Ice Age troglodytes left behind carvings of mammoths and reindeer on tusks and antlers, meaning that apart from the Ice Age movies, this cave art is proof that Homo sapiens shared the ancient land with Ice Age creatures. Those caves, at a site called La Madeleine, were so significant that they gave their name to the Magdalenian culture of prehistoric Europe. But cave dwelling isn't really a thing of the past, as in much later times, people didn't abandon those caves entirely. For instance, during the medieval period, some of those very same cliffs in the French Valley were re-inhabited by communities seeking protection and shelter. They built a troglodyte village complete with homes, a blacksmith's workshop, a bakery, and even a chapel carved into the rock. Clearly, for these people, living in caves wasn't just a Paleolithic thing, it was a practical solution that resurfaced whenever circumstances demanded safe hiding places. Furthermore, in many parts of the world, troglodyte communities persisted right into modern times. A striking example is the village of Maymand in Iran, a place literally dug into the side of the mountains. Maymand is a UNESCO-recognized troglodyte settlement where about 350 hand-dug cave houses honeycomb the rocks. Archaeologists believe Maymand may have been inhabited for up to 12,000 years, making it one of the oldest continually occupied places in the Iranian plateau. Even today, a small number of families still live in these cave homes, especially in winter when they descend from higher pastures to seek warmth in the earth-sheltered dwellings. In essence, Maymand's residents carry on a lifestyle that would be instantly recognizable to ancient troglodytes. Another famous troglodyte locale is Matmata in southern Tunisia, known for its otherworldly underground houses. The indigenous Amazigh or Berber people of this region have for centuries dug their homes vertically into soft sandstone. They excavate a deep circular pit and then hollow out rooms around the sides of the pit, creating an open courtyard in the middle and cave rooms as living quarters. These underground houses are naturally cool in the desert heat and insulated from the harsh climate. Some of the troglodyte homes in Matmata are said to be over 1,000 years old and still inhabited by local families today. Matmata gained fame in pop culture when one of its cave dwellings, the Hotel City Driss, was used as the filming location for Luke Skywalker's childhood home in Star Wars. Tourists still pay to visit the Tatooine troglodyte home, but many real locals have gradually moved out to modern towns over the past decades. The fact that a number of people continue to live in these ancient pit houses, maintaining them with traditional knowledge, speaks to the durability and appeal of troglodyte architecture even in the 21st century. Iran and Tunisia aren't even the only places with living troglodyte heritage. Cave and rock dwellings can be found in regions as diverse as Cappadocia in Turkey, famous for its rock-cut homes and churches, the Loire Valley of France, where soft tuffo stone was carved into dwellings, and China's Shaanxi province, where Yaodong cave houses shelter millions. In North Africa, beyond Matmata, Berber communities in Libya and Morocco also had troglodyte homes. Marvelous verdict! From caves to culture! As you can see for yourself, tracing the history of troglodytes is like swimming in a meandering river. From ancient historians telling tall tales of snake-eating cavemen, to actual communities carving sustainable homes in cliffs and underground, to modern storytellers reviving the trope as cinematic nightmare fuel. It's a concept that has proven remarkably hardy. We no longer literally think monsters live in caves, but the metaphor of the cave dweller still resonates with us deeply, whether as an insult for someone out of touch or as a source of imaginative horror in fiction. Perhaps troglodytes fascinate us because they represent something very basic about humanity. They force us to consider life stripped down to its fundamentals, like shelter, survival, and fear of the dark unknown. In fact, this is why serial killers like Ed Gein and Ted Bundy fascinate us so much. They show us what we would be if society didn't exist in the first place, and when society doesn't exist, when social norms and civilization don't exist, we resort to our baser instincts, much of which is based on violence. Unfortunately, that's all we got for you this time, folks, but we hope to see you back in our cave real soon. If you enjoyed this content, consider leaving a like and subscribe, but otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.